The Silk Road was the world's first international commercial highway. It connected two of the world's greatest empires: the producer of silk, China, and the consumer of silk, the Romans.
It was a vast network of trading that goes across Central Asia into India and China.
The Silk Road really didn't exist with markers and milestones as much as it was commercial trading routes.
We call it the Silk Route because of silk being one of the major commodities, but many other commodities were traveling as well.
Chinese silk was the finest fabric in the ancient world.
Silk manufacturing is a state secret in China. No Chinese weaver is to share that knowledge with a foreigner. And so this was something the Europeans couldn't produce. And so when they discover silk, they're enraptured. This is the substance they want. And the ruling class back in Rome clamor to be able to dress in silk. If you've lived your life wearing nothing but sackcloth and wool, to be able to put on a silk garment is just the most extraordinary experience.
Some of silk's attraction, I think, is its very rarity. There were not many people who could afford something imported from that distance.
If you're packing these on the backs of mules and camels, it's a very slow and expensive process. You need high value per volume, and this is what spices, gems, and silks are. They are very high value goods in terms of their weight.
The fascinating thing about China and Rome is that you have these two huge empires that traded with each other, but probably not directly. We do have some fascinating glimpses of accounts in China of Romans making it that far away. I think it's always amazing how much the luxury goods of the capital, or even the fads and fashions, generated this adventurous travel to unknown portions of the globe. And that whole world was in some ways united by this interaction between these very distant cultures.
Villagers here in Jinhua earn their living by making paper the traditional way, sheet by sheet. Gathering the material they use to make paper is as simple as going into the backyard. The villagers use bamboo, which grows in abundance on these mountainsides. They say it only takes about 1 year for it to grow to this height. Workers cut the bamboo down, dry it, and chop it into chips. Then they steam the chips until they're crumbly and moist. Next, the bamboo is soaked in bleach and ground into a thick mush. Once the mush is white, they grind it again into liquid pulp, perfect for paper. 3 centuries ago, the process took 100 days. Now it takes a week. Once they've suspended the pulp in a vat of water, they use screens to gather a thin layer and then lay the new paper out to drain with one sweeping, elegant motion. This family has been making paper here for 14 generations, nearly 300 years. It's a technique that takes a long time to master. For the greater part of the history of sailing, the technology of Chinese sailboats has been drastically superior to anything that any Westerner had. Much of that superiority lay in the sails. This is called a batten sail. The battens are the strips of bamboo, and the advantage of them is that they give mariners great flexibility. If the wind is strong, they can only raise 1 or 2 battens. If the wind is weak, they can raise them all. The parallel battens keep the sail from billowing out too far and losing thrust. Another revolutionary innovation was aligning pivoting sails along the axis of the boat, so they could catch the wind from different directions. In the West, sails tended to be at right angles with the boat, and that meant they could only sail properly when the wind was behind them. But with this, you could sail with the wind in 3 quarters. If it looks familiar, that's because every modern Western yacht you've seen has copied this design.
We're especially fascinated with the most mysterious invisible force of all: magnetism. The result of their fascination was the creation of the world's first magnetic compass. This was called a synnon, a section of lodestone, which is naturally magnetic, was carved into the shape of the Big Dipper and placed on a polished board. The circular center of the board represented heaven, and the square represented earth, and the spoon, the Big Dipper. This constellation was especially sacred, as 2 stars in the Big Dipper always point to the pole star. The Emperor was the earthly counterpart of the pole star, around which all the other stars rotated. The master himself, Confucius, said, "He who governs virtuously may be compared to the polar star, which keeps its place as the other stars turn around it." All visitors to the Emperor had to sit to his south, so that the stars could rotate around his head. Therefore, officials around the Emperor were seen as inhabiting the constellations rotating around the polar star. And so the synnon was a mystical instrument used not for navigation, but as a tool for geomancy, or feng shui. Feng shui is a technique for aligning cities and houses harmoniously with the Earth's forces. Forces detected with the aid of this compass. The synnon evolved into more complex feng shui compasses, which are still in use today. Hundreds of years before the first compass was to be found on a European ship, small factories in China mass-produced a variety of compass designs. The world's first prototype of the dry modern navigational compass was called the magnetic turtle. South was indicated by the direction of the needle, which was attached to a magnet concealed inside the model. Around the year 850 AD, Chinese ships began to carry a water compass to help them navigate during murky weather and storms, when there was no way to use the sun or the stars. This simple mariner's compass would always point south, unlike modern compasses today.
first methods of print, a simple process which revolutionized the intellectual world. What we're seeing here is the process of printing from a woodcut. Now, all a woodcut is a piece of wood with the image you want carved in reverse. You take ink, apply it to the wood, put on your piece of paper, apply pressure, and you have a printed image.
Having come up with the woodcut, the Chinese then ran with the idea. They made small woodcuts with individual characters inscribed on the back. They had invented, in other words, movable type. It was another critical invention that arose during the Song dynasty. But the reason movable type didn't take off in China was that instead of using a few dozen letters, they used thousands of characters, each one representing a different word. This obstacle limited the use of movable type, but printing continued. It was in China that the information age truly began.
Gunpowder certainly has to be ranked among the most important inventions of man.
Gunpowder was first discovered by Chinese alchemists who were looking for the elixir of life. And they found that this combination of charcoal and saltpeter and sulfur burned very fast. If you put that into a sealed, confined space, then you get expanding gases. So something has to give. You get a bang as the thing explodes.
The first use of this observation is, well, gee, that would be great to celebrate the emperor's birthday with.
Gunpowder at first, it's just a thing that goes boom. You know, they learned to make it into fireworks.
And so gunpowder starts off as a toy.
Guns took a long time to develop from that first flash of gunpowder. Certainly by the 1200s, they're using what they call the fire lance. Like a lance, it looks like a stick, but it's actually a hollow bamboo tube with gunpowder in the end. And initially, that would just spew out flame. But it's also reckoned that around that time, they were putting projectiles in there.
Gunpowder spurred a complete arms race that ultimately led to building massive cannons that could batter away at the walls of fortresses.
This begins to move to the West. It changes how humans relate to one another. It changes how kingdoms are built, how kingdoms are torn down. It changes colonization. It changes how we subject people who don't have it.
We, as a species, had so much fear and created so much mythology around the concept of thunder and lightning. In the gun, you have brought that kind of fear, that kind of primal fear, and placed it in the hands of an individual.
In this entire process, we are increasing the lethality of warfare. The individual soldier is becoming more and more powerful, more and more deadly.
As soon as somebody develops a weapon, somebody else develops a defense against that weapon. And this is the self-perpetuating arms race that we're still caught up in.
There's really no part of our human experience since the development of gunpowder that hasn't been influenced by its presence.